I think this is the most Patrons we've had in a single week. So before we start the video, a large thank you to James, Zachary, Lily, Josh, a name I unfortunately cannot pronounce. Thank you for the support, my friend. Demetrius, Dakota, Anthony, Quentin, George, Michael, Isabella, Logan PHX, Zinmayo, Ralph G, Danny Hood, Cayman, Runkai, Ja, and Ryan for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. Hello guys, and today we're going to be adding on to our UI equipment screen. So we're going to make it so we can actually equip helmets from the head slot and load them in from our inventory and change them with this UI. So let's open up the player UI and go down to the left panel, and then let's open up the equipment screen window and drop that down. And then where we have this equipment window, we have the UI background, and that actually contains another UI background, which is for all of our weapons. So let's just actually rename that to, you can call it weapons UI or weapons background, whatever you want. And then I'm going to duplicate that and drag it down so we have another one right below it. We're actually going to delete the content of it. I'm not going to get too particular with the area I have it in right now. So I'm going to rename this armor. You can call it equipment if you want. And this is going to contain our head slot, our chest or body slot, our leg slot, and our hand slot. So the first thing I'm going to do is go over here and remove this grid layout group. I'm going to use a horizontal layout group instead. Oops, I mean delete it all. This is just because we only have one row of icons going from left to right, whereas up top we have the left hand and right hand, and then we have two rows. So I'm just going to use a horizontal layout group for this one. I'm going to rename this to head slot, and I'm going to rename the right hand icon to head icon, and then I think, or head slot icon. I think I do have some UI images, yes, from the last video we used for our stats. So I'm going to have to make one real quick, but we'll use the helmet for that one. I think we use that for, I can't remember honestly. Okay, so if we look over here now on the scripts, this is actually the hand equipment slot UI script, and also we have 3 on-click events. So this is actually going to work exactly the same as equipping a weapon, except instead of looking for a weapon in your weapon inventory, it's going to look for a helmet in your helmet inventory. Now, I'm going to make the body, leg, and hand slot, just as I did with this helmet slot. We're not going to code these in this video. I'm just going to do this. So while I'm making these, I'm just going to look for an icon. I'm going to talk over what we're going to do. So we're actually going to create another inventory for our helmets, because in Souls you can cycle through inventories that sort all your items by a particular item type, like headgear, body gear, etc., etc. So right now we have an inventory that loads up our weapon gear. We're going to make another inventory that loads up our helmet gear. And this is going to behave exactly the same as the first one we made a long time ago. And I just made this leggings icon. If you guys want, I'll include it in the description. So once we load up the inventory, it's going to populate the inventory with all the helmets we have in our quote-unquote like master inventory. And then we can basically click on any of those helmets as long as we've opened up the inventory from our helmet equipment slot icon. And then it will change our icon, or our helmet rather, and the icon. So again, it is basically a very similar process to how we did the weapons, but I know that was a long time ago, so we're going to go through it again. And this is going to work the same for all of the gear. So instead of spreading this out across 4 videos, I think I'll just do one here now and really articulate what's going on, and then maybe do the other 3 in one video and go a bit faster. So first we have this head or hand equipment slot UI script. This is attached to the actual UI slots for the weapons. I don't like that name because hand equipment slot makes it sound like it's a hand equipment slot for your armor, so I wasn't thinking too far ahead back then, so we're going to change that soon. But first let's make another script and call this head equipment slot UI. Let's keep the naming conventions the same so we know that these scripts belong to the same area, we'll say. So in this hand equipment script UI, what we have going on here, first let's rename this. I'm going to change it to, you can even say weapon equipment script, equipment slot UI. So we have an add item here, and that actually puts an item into the image of the icon, as you can see. And we have a few on-click events going on here too. So I'm just going to add this head equipment slot UI script here, and I'm going to double click that. We're going to basically copy the entirety of the other script but make a few changes. Now you could make this derived from a base class, like inventory or equipment slot UI, because it could share add item and remove item, as you can see, or clear item rather, and even select the slot, and we can just overwrite it with virtual void. But just because we've already got this made and we're not deriving, I'm just going to make this its own class. So we're not going to derive from anything. We're not going to share any common classes. So I'm going to go over here now and I'm going to call upon these variables as well. We're also going to need to say using Unity engine.ui, or else we can't use the image. But I'm going to rename this weapon item to head equipment. Make sure you rename it, because then you can just change the variable type and it should work fine. And then up here, I'm going to grab this weapon variable and paste this here as well. And then I'm going to rename this to head equipment. Now that will give us, we could use this, the keyword this, but I'm just going to change that a little bit so we don't have to. Let's call it head item. There we go. Okay, so now we change this from weapon item to head equipment. And then we can, I'm actually just going to rename this to helmet item. Okay. Now we change this from weapon item to helmet equipment. And you can see all this is doing is it's adding a registered helmet to this slot and then giving it the icon of that helmet. So it changes the UI's icon to the newly equipped helmet if we use that function. Select this slot is simple. We're just going to notify the UI manager that we are currently selecting the helmet slot. We can use this for future functionality to know which slot we're actually trying to mess with when we're trying to do things like unequip a helmet by pressing one button instead of opening up the helmet's inventory. So let's say using Unity engine.ui. Okay, and now this looks pretty good. So I'm going to save that. And now let's go back over to the UI manager and let's add a bool right here under equipment window slot selected. We'll say public bool helmet equipment slot selected, or head equipment slot selected, because it might not always be a helmet. It could be like a wrap or a hood. All right, now reset all selected slots. Make sure you're adding your head equipment slot to it and equaling it to false. And over here, we're going to say UI manager dot head equipment slot selected equals true. There we go. All right, let's go over and save that now, and let's hop back into the actual project. Yeah, it looks good. Let's minimize that. Okay, let this compile and load. So now down here, there's actually a couple things we don't need. So let's open up this equipment window UI script. You can see we have this right hand 01 slot selected, right hand 0 slot 2, yada yada, but that doesn't really go anywhere. So let's just delete all these. I think we planned to put that here and we ended up moving it and I didn't delete it. So let's get rid of all that. Let's get rid of the start function because it's empty. And this still has a purpose. So this actually updates our equipment window screen. And I'm going to change this from hand equipment slot UI to weapon equipment slot UI. So this function below here, this actually notifies the equipment screen. It needs to change all the UI icons and update what's being displayed as being equipped. So let's actually drag all these back in here, because when you change the name of a variable, it's going to get rid of everything that you have there. So make sure you're dragging all these back in. Now, we can get rid of that first on-click button here on all these. So this first on-click event, get rid of it, because it just, to my knowledge, it does need to be used. And if it does, we'll come back and correct it, but that does need to be there. So now we have three. What are we doing? Well, we're activating the weapon inventory, and then we're disabling the equipment screen. That's the first two things we're doing. So we don't have a helmet equipment inventory yet. So what we need to do is duplicate the weapon equipment inventory, and we're going to copy it just as it already is, but do it for the helmet equipment. So let's call this head equipment inventory window. And then I'm going to erase or change everything that's a child of it to, rather. So we have weapon item inventory, head equipment item inventory. And then we have the inventory slot parent that can stay the same. And then we have the weapon inventory slot, and we'll change it to head equipment inventory slot. So we have a script here too called weapon inventory slot. Let's see what this does. Well, first off, we can change what we're calling an awake. We only need to call the UI manager. And we can say get component in parent, because that sits in a game object above everything else. We don't need to use find object. And then we can go back over here to the UI manager. You can see that we have a player manager there. Let's make that public, that we can call everything that's UI related from our UI manager. So if we need to reach across to the player from any of our UI manager's components, like the scripts, we'll just go from the master component, the UI manager. We'll treat that like it's the player manager of the UI. So we'll get rid of these two things, and then we'll just simply say UI manager.player.player inventory. So I'm going to fix all these errors in a sec. I'm actually going to not show the full process. There's only like a dozen here, but I'll just show you the first couple, and then I'll come back when I'm done. So you're going to say UI manager.player.player inventory manager. Just copy that and then just paste it over like this, just like that. And most of these errors, I think all but a couple, are the player inventory. This is just so we have to have a bunch of calls on awake again, because it's just a waste of memory and such, and it's just really unnecessary. Okay, that looks good. Now I'm just going to cut back in a second when this is all done. All right, so we're good. Now let's minimize that. And what we got going on here? So we have an add item, very similar. We're just updating the icon and we're setting it to active. So if we have a helmet in our inventory and we use that function, it's going to display a helmet and it's going to change the inventory's icon to the helmet's icon. And we have the clear inventory slot, which disables the slot and also hides the image or icon. So let's make a thing or a script called head equipment inventory slot. And it will again mimic the behavior of a weapon inventory slot. And if you want to, you can use a base class because you're going to make one of these for the body, the legs, and the hands too, and then all your other objects. You don't have to. I'm not going to in this video. I do use a base class in my standalone project though. But it would share things like an image and an item. Instead of using a weapon item specifically, you could just use a general item. And then you could sort it by, doing a cast after. There's a million ways to do this, is what I'm trying to say. You don't need to copy exactly what I'm doing. So I'm going to say using UnityEngine.ui, and I'm going to change the weapon item to helmet equipment. And we can actually just go up here now and change this to helmet equipment. And it's conveniently called new item, so we don't have to change the name of that because item is fine. And down here under equip this item, well, let's erase all of this up to here and we'll see what we're actually needing to do. So we can actually dictate what we need to do by making some pseudocode. First, let's change this to if UI manager.head equipment slot is selected. And then we're going to make a few lines of pseudocode or to-dos. So we're going to add the currently equipped helmet, if any, to our inventory, because if we're changing our helmet, we don't want it to just lose the one we have on. So we're going to take the one that we've already got on, if we do have one on, and put that in our inventory. And then we're going to switch out the one that we have on for the new one. So basically, changing it, not so much switching it or deleting it, whatever. You replace it with a new helmet. And then lastly, we're going to remove the new helmet from our inventory after we've equipped it because we don't want to have a duplicate of it. And that will be fine. And that's it really for this section of the code. And we do something similar right here in all of these lines for the weapons. So we're going to delete that. And of course, we need to update our gear. So what we're actually wearing, we need to display that. So we'd say load the new gear. And then we need to update the actual UI's equipment screen to display the new icons. So we're going to say update the new gear to reflect on the UI/equipment screen. Okay, this is all very simple and very straightforward. I'll start with number 1. So this is a simple if statement to check. We're just going to check our inventory for a helmet. So before we do that, let's go to our player inventory manager. And right now let's add a list. This is our weapon inventory. Let's make a list for our head equipment inventory. So we can say helmet equipment. And again, souls, when you press your inventory button, you can cycle through your inventory and it actually sorts all your items by types. This is one way of doing it. Another way is making a master inventory and then loading specific items from that inventory based on their type. Both ways are fine. I'm just using it to do this way. So first, let's say if UI manager.player inventory manager, and then we're going to check our newly created head equipment inventory after. So we're going to say UI manager.player inventory manager.current head equipment. If it does not equal null, if we're actually wearing a helmet right now and the current head equipment is not null, then we're going to go to our newly created head equipment inventory and we're going to add that specific helmet. Okay, that's the first step. So we put the helmet we have on, if any, back in our inventory. And then the next step is to actually replace the helmet we currently have on with a new one. So we're going to say, it's just called item. We're going to say player inventory manager.current head equipment or helmet equipment equals item. And I've mistakenly copied the head inventory, not the current helmet. So I'm going to fix that. There we go. So now this puts in our new helmet on our character's head. And now we actually have to remove it from our inventory because we've just put it on our head. So we'll say UI manager.player inventory manager.head equipment inventory.remove. And then we'll use item. Item being the helmet that we are using in this slot right now. And then finally, we load the gear. I believe that's in the player equipment manager. So we'll say UI manager.player equipment manager. Is it called load or is it called equip all equipment models? That's the one. Okay, and this last step, we have to show the gear to reflect on the UI/equipment screen. Okay, well, we need to make a new function for that. So over here on equipment windows UI, or equipment window UI rather, we're going to make a public void. I'm going to call this load armor on equipment screen. So we're going to use this statement function rather for all 4 pieces. we're going to need to pass the player inventory manager. But right now, since we only have the helmet, that's all we're going to have to worry about. In the next video, we'll add the rest. So we're going to say public helmet equipment. It will be public, what did I call that? Head equipment slot UI. And this one is just a single variable, not an array, because there's only one head equipment slot. We'll call that head equipment slot UI, or head equipment slot. And then let's go down here under load armor on equipment screen, and we're going to say if player inventory dot current helmet equipment does not equal null, we are going to say, and I'm going to rename this to head equipment slot UI because that is going to stick with the naming convention. I don't know why I did that. Head equipment slot UI. There we go. Apply. We're going to say head equipment slot UI dot add item, and then we're going to pass the item in our current helmet equipment, and that will update the image on the equipment screen. Else, we're going to clear it because we don't have one, and it should be blank. We'll say head equipment slot UI dot clear item, and that will make the icon go back to being empty. And then we just simply call the function here. We can actually call it through the UI manager. Now, I can't remember what it is called. It's not equipment screen window. I believe that is the game object. It'll be UI manager dot equipment window UI dot load armor equipment on screen. There we go. We pass the UI manager dot player inventory manager. All right, that is good to go and should be working as accordingly. Now we still need to hook up a few things because we're not actually updating our head equipment inventory to reflect all the stuff in our inventory. So let's add a script here. Let's add the head equipment inventory slot on our new inventory slot. Let's drag in the icon or the image for it. And down here now, let's take a look at the other inventory button and see what's going on. So we have equip this item and set game object is inactive. So let's drag in our head inventory slot and go to the function equip this item. And then that's already setting active as false because we copied it. Now we need to make a header here for our head equipment inventory. We're going to need our inventory slot prefab. Our parent transform, because that tells us we're going to instantiate copies of the inventory slot if we have multiple helmets. And then our array for the total amount of inventory slots. So it's the exact same thing as the weapon slots, really, for this part of this tutorial. The inventory will function identical to how all the other inventories will function. They're going to have a parent, which they instantiate copies of an inventory slot under for every item there is in the player's inventory of that type. And that will be included in an array. So let's go down here now. I think it's under update UI. We actually update the weapons inventory. Yes, so here it is. I'm going to get rid of this region because I don't like it. I'm going to replace it with a comment. I really don't like regions now. I don't know why. Excuse me. So I'm going to say weapon inventory slots. And then down here, I will make a comment and say helmet or head equipment inventory slots. And you can see we have a for loop here. And what we're doing is we're checking our weapons inventory slots.length. And if our player manager's inventory has more weapons in their inventory, or less, than then we're just basically going and checking for the lengths, and we're instantiating an inventory slot for each weapon we have in our inventory, and we're instantiating that inventory slot under the parent of that specific inventory. So for example, the weapon inventory slot would instantiate under the weapon inventory slot's parent. For every weapon we have in our inventory, we create a new slot under that parent. And that's it. It's pretty simple. We're going to do the exact same thing here for the head equipment. So essentially here, you're going to rewrite the same functionalities, but you're going to be replacing the weapons parent with the head equipment's parent, the weapon inventory slots with the head equipment inventory slots, and then the weapon inventory from the player manager with the head equipment inventory from the player manager. And then we're still going to have to do a couple things with the actual inspector, some on-click events. But other than that, it will function much the same. Now, we do have, I'm just going to talk over this while I type, because again, this is exactly the same as above. Not much explanation needed here, as what I'm doing. We have this update UI function, and I believe this is only called when we actually hit the inventory button. And that could give us a problem that I'm going to address. We're going to fix that. I just want to see if it will give us a problem first. But basically, this is only updating the inventory when we hit the inventory button, which in my case, I believe might be escape. But anyway, I digress. We shall get to that. So I'm just going to say here now, head equipment inventory slots I.add item player inventory manager head equipment inventory I. Then make an else If there is no item here, then we're going to clear the inventory slot, which disables the game object and also erases the icon. So we'll say head equipment inventory slots I dot clear inventory slot. Okay, cool. Looks good. Now, let's minimize that. Let's save. Over here, you can see we have 3 on-click events. We're opening the inventory. Let's do the same thing over here. Let's make 3. So we're opening the inventory, we're closing the equipment screen, and then we're selecting the slot. So let's bring in the equipment screen and the inventory. Let's open the inventory. Let's close the equipment screen. And then let's use the script on this to select this slot. So we'll be head equipment slot, select this slot. All right, cool. And then next, let's go down under here and drag the item icon in so we know that's going to actually update. And now on the actual head equipment inventory is the next place to go. Let's open that up. Let's drag in the head equipment slot UI that's on the equipment window. Make sure that's there. No missing variables. That's so we can actually update the equipment screen when we change our equipment. And now the inventory slot parent goes under the head equipment inventory slot parent, and then the head equipment inventory slot prefab goes under the head inventory slot prefab. So make sure these are dragged in the inspector and in the right places, or else you will have some problems. It will not work. Your inventory will not update. So now I have this bug here. If I double click it, it's actually on update current consumable. This is because I unequipped my consumable. We're not checking for null on starts. Let's do that. That's not related to this video, but I'm going to fix it now because I just noticed it. So it's really simple. Just use an if statement. If player.player inventory manager .current consumable is not equal null, then we run this code. If not, we're not going to. Should be checking for null. It's my bad. I think I was eager to test to make sure it worked and updated, and I didn't put that if statement there. Do the same thing for current spell while we're here, because if you don't have a current spell equipped, it will throw you an error because it's trying to display something that's not there. So there we go. If current spell is not equal null. Alternatively, too, you could check for this in the actual function itself on the update current spell icon or consumable icon, but I'm going to check right there. All right, so let's save that, and let's actually copy this weapon inventory slots call here and put it on our awake. This is on the UI manager. And then let's do the same thing for our head equipment inventory slots. So head equipment inventory slots equals head equipment inventory slot parent.get components in children, and then it will be head equipment inventory slot. And I think this is the last piece of the puzzle now. We can actually do some testing and see if this works. I believe this is all we need to do. So that's everything in its rightful place, and we're calling everything's dragging the inspector. So I'm going to go ahead and add a helmet to our inventory. We're using the Fallen Knight's helmet, so I'm going to add the Knight's helmet. And now I'm going to go into the game here, and I'm going to open up my inventory, the equipment screen. I'm going to press this right here, and there you go. That's the Knight's helmet, and you can see it changes. Now, we have a problem, though. Do you see this? You might not have caught that, but if I don't press escape and close the inventory completely, this little menu down here, it actually does not update the UI, so we can't change the helmet. But if I fully press escape and get out of it, it will. So this is because we're only updating the UI when we actually press the, I believe it's the inventory. So if we follow this back now, final references, we can see that it's actually updating the UI right here. That's only being called once. So what we can do is continuously update it while the UI is open. You can do this on fixed update if you want, if you're a stickler for not calling it so many times. But for now, before we're actually finished with the UI system, we're going to put it right here. We're just going to say if inventory flag, update the UI all the time. So if our inventory is open, we're constantly updating the UI. Now if we go over here and click on the helmet, you can see that I don't have to completely close out everything. It still stays, or it still updates, and we can change it out perfectly. So there you go, guys. You have a equipment screen that you can, or an equipment screen rather, that you can now change your helmet equipment from. And in the next video, we're going to try to do the same thing with the chest, legs, and hands. I may put it in 2 videos because it could be long, but I'll try to go a little bit more quickly this time, and maybe we can put it all in one. And then we're going to start adding cool things like the stats to be displayed on screen, etc., etc., etc. So we're going to really start hammering away at the UI now in the next few videos. So as usual, if you guys made this far, please don't forget to drop a like. Genuinely helps out the series so much. Leave a comment to help appease the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're feeling super generous, check out my Patreon below. I will see you guys in the next one. Talk soon.